Yesterday, about this time, I was interviewing New Zealand University's New Zealand Chief Executive Chris Phelan to do with the latest, and this was from the Times, university or tertiary rankings, international rankings that had been published. In that conversation yesterday, a number of views were held by Chris Phelan, and obviously they are the views of Universities New Zealand. What, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 universities is it that we've got in New Zealand? To explain why New Zealand's universities, and particularly, it has to be said, some of our more traditional tertiary institutions are dropping in those rankings, and particularly the Times Higher Education World University rankings that were published yesterday show that Otago University is plummeting like a stone. Auckland University has just fallen out of the top 150, and that's our top ranked institutions, and many of them are now bobbling around being the 4th or 5th or 600th university in the world, figures that would have once been considered unacceptable. And they were to a degree by Chris Phelan, but he had a series of reasons why that might be, and most of them are connected from a lack of government support. As a consequence of that, we are now talking to Dr. Michael Johnston, who is an educational consultant and specialist really with the New Zealand Initiative, researched this issue quite a lot. And Michael is now joining us, of all places, from India, where, just to put this in some perspective, it's 2:45 in the morning. Michael, welcome to the show. You look remarkably good. Have you been up all night, or did you have a bit of sleep beforehand, or are you on some form of medication?
I had a bit of a snooze, Michael, but I've been looking forward to talking to you, so, you know, I'm here.
Oh, listen, you are. But as I said, you're looking good, mate. God, if I looked like that at 9 o'clock in the morning, I'd be happy.
Thank you.
There you go. He's got something.
I am a night owl by nature.
You must be. Listen, mate, yesterday Chris Phelan from University of New Zealand explaining these rankings, and they were simply a confirmation of New Zealand's downward progression in tertiary institutions of this country, made the point that the funding of New Zealand universities is below the OECD average, well below. But he said that other things like academic reputation and citation and research are variables. In essence, what he was saying is there are lots of variables. These aren't necessarily accurate, and if they are, it's all the government's fault, which was my take on it. What's your take on these rankings and what they mean for New Zealand?
He's right about a few things there. It's certainly the case that the rankings are put together against a bunch of different variables. I had a look at the Times Higher Education measures, and really 90% of the rankings are determined by teaching and research, and about 60% by research. So that's research, the research environment, which is things like funding for research, and also research quality, which is things like citations. And there's a whole lot of different measures that go into that. And certainly we expect some fluctuation in those things over time, and you do see that when you look at the data. They go up and down a bit over successive years. And Chris Phelan's also right that we don't fund our universities as well as many others in the English-speaking world in particular. But I do think that there's some domestic issues with our universities as well, which are pretty likely to lead to loss of international reputation over time. I don't want to make too much of these particular ranking measures because, as I say, I think there is some fluctuation over time. But it's pretty predictable to me. Well, if you start introducing things like compulsory courses in the Māori worldview, as Auckland University would like to do, and I believe its council has written its Senate in insisting on introducing a course like that, that's going to be of limited interest to international students, and you're going to start to have problems, I mean, even more problems recruiting international staff as well. And we could also think about our research funding, where you get special loadings or special consideration if you're researching topics that are of interest in Indigenous matters and things like that. So we have taken some pretty parochial steps, I would say, in both teaching and research in New Zealand, which is likely to compromise us, at least in the future, if it isn't already.
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed, it's an extraordinary, and just for listeners, the number of international students that make up the rolls, Michael, of our tertiary institutions and how reliant they are upon those international student numbers. For example, the Auckland University of Technology, 45% of its roll is foreign students, and the lowest of those is University of Otago with 15%, but there's a big range in between 45 and 15, obviously. What you're suggesting is that the more parochial New Zealand gets, the less attractive we'll be, certainly to that international market.
Indeed, and you're right, we're amongst the most exposed in the world. I think only Australia is more exposed to the international market than we are in terms of relying on those international students to fund our institutions. And again, Chris Whelan is not wrong when he says that our universities are not well funded by the state, and so they look to the international market to supplement their incomes, and that's entirely understandable. But, one of the things that's quite striking within the ranking data, because I did have a look at the different categories that contribute to the rankings, and one of those is what they call international outlook, and that covers both the proportion of students that come from internationally and also staff recruitment internationally. And unsurprisingly, those scores plummeted largely due to COVID border closures. They haven't recovered. In fact, they've got a bit worse in this year than they were last year. So the big falls were obviously during the border closures, and there was nothing the universities could do about that. But the students are not coming back in droves.
No,
so
the other aspect of
the
other aspect of this, and I noticed across the Tasman, is that Australian universities have dropped in their rankings as well. Certainly with the Times Higher Education Supplement, they're still ranked vastly better than New Zealand universities, but they've dropped too.
Or at least their big ones are,
Yeah. Why would you consider? Are there related factors that affect the Australian universities as well as ours?
Well, they've certainly suffered from the loss of international markets as well. I don't know how well they've recovered since the COVID border closures. In actual fact, the international outlook factor doesn't impact hugely on the rankings because it only contributes a small fraction of the overall, but the big weightings go to teaching and research. So, but certainly it's going to affect the funds that are available to our universities, and we've already seen massive cuts across the country in terms of staff and courses at our universities due to funding shortfalls. So, and look, the big Australian universities, Melbourne University, Sydney University, University of New South Wales, Monash and so on, they've got deep pockets. They've got a bit of reserve that our universities tend not to have. So
there'll be a lot of people listening to this at the moment saying, Michael, whoop-de-doo, universities, how important are they really? Can you, in the modern context, are they as important to a country's economy and, if you like, the political/cultural fabric of a nation as they used to be?
I'm going to give a slightly complex answer to that, because I would say having a university like we used to in the 1980s and the 1990s and even into the 2000s, that is a really important thing. But actually, we've done a lot to sacrifice that in a forced way, in a sense, right? There was a report out of the initiative by my colleague, Dr. James Kierstead, a couple of months ago, showing that academic freedom is under assault from all sorts of quarters. And that makes it very hard for universities to fulfil their unique role because, we've got politics and other institutions to do trades training and other kinds of professional training. the real heart and soul of the university is, in the past, has been production of knowledge. So that is really important to the economy. You might not see it in the immediate term because a lot of that research is long-term. But if you start cutting it off at the knees by shutting down the kinds of conversations and the kinds of debates on campuses, and really it's a cultural thing in the end. If you start to subvert the culture of free debate, as we have done, then they cease to be they cease to fulfil that role of knowledge production in the most efficient way and the best way that they can. And I think that's the direction we're heading fast. So I would like to think that the universities can do.